we have a very, very, very busy week this week. All right. We've got UI and UX, which we're starting. This is going to be a week-long piece, so everything's going to be completed on Friday. We've got little miniature assignments due to build up to the actual prototyping of an app, which is what we're going to work on. This is obviously really where design is in UI and UX right now, because that's the big thing, okay? User interface, user experience. And so it's not a huge part of our curriculum, but something that's important because not only does it encompass UI and UX, but it encompasses layout, it encompasses color, it encompasses font, it encompasses all the things that we've been going over. It's also going to give you a little precursor when it comes to user experience to web design next year. Right? And how a user goes about visually seeing the piece that you're designing and interacting with it, hence the UI and the UX. All right? This page on the curriculum site functions a little bit different than any of the other pages. So if you go to sophomores, normally you wouldn't click on this main page. When you click on the main page, that's going to take you to the overall assignment. All right? The general directions about the assignment, the schedule of the assignment, things like that. All right? Underneath it are the multiple pieces of the assignments. Okay? Today, you are going to complete a paper wireframe. All right? And you're going to complete a style tile. Right now, you have no idea what those are. But we're going to get to that. All right? So we're going to take it in little pieces. So Monday and Tuesday, if we look at our assignment objectives, okay? Monday, we're doing the paper wireframe. We're doing the style tile. All right? You have a printed iPhone frame on your desk. That's going to be for your wireframe. It's also going to be for your comp later on. Tuesday, tomorrow, you're going to create your design comp. That's like any other design comp that we've done. Okay? And you've got the entire 3-hour block to work on it. Should be more than enough time. All right? On Wednesday, we're going to get into the actual introduction of how to use XD, all right, which is really simple, believe it or not. It's drag and drop. There are some really cool components that they've actually started to bring into Illustrator in terms of how to use font and how to bring images in. All right? And then you're going to work on your digital wireframe, which is going to be taking the paper wireframe and putting it into XD. So basically, at that point, you will have an app that functions that looks like hell. All right? But everything will click and everything will go where it's supposed to go. All right? You will not have added the visual components to it. All right? On Thursday, we begin prototyping, which means then you're going to go ahead, take what you have for a digital wireframe, and now you're going to add all the elements from your style tile and your design comp into it. All right? So chances are Wednesday you'll actually start the prototyping as well, because once you get your digital wireframe done, they don't take long. You'll be able to tap into that. And then Friday you're going to work on your prototype and you're going to complete it. All right? You're going to need 4 pages on your app. One is the splash screen or the login. That's simple. So just 3 other pages. What's your app going to be? That's up to you. Some categories: social media, travel, food, photo share, music. I don't want you designing your own app. You don't have time for that. Okay? I want you to taking an app that currently exists and redesigning it, tweaking it, how you think it should look. We've all used apps where we're like, oh, this doesn't work. This would be so much better if this was here. This would be so much better if this was here. The colors look like this. Okay? Keep in mind, it shouldn't look like the app did. You should be able to redesign it. All right? So that's the overall objective here, is what we're going to be working on. And this is all done on Friday. This is so that we don't carry it over into the following week. I don't think it's something we need to spend 2 weeks on. It's an introductory to what happens. Some of you are going to like, actually most of you will like XD. It's pretty easy. All right? XD was created by Adobe to prototype. So you can actually prototype websites, applications, anything that has interaction in it. They seem to be updating it virtually every other day. They've added certain things, like you can actually prototype voice commands. So you can set it to say, you know, hey Siri, da-da-da-da-da, right? And it actually does it. The idea is, if you're working with a client and...
Could you please repeat what you said?
See, Siri's angry at me. If you're working with a client, you can actually send it to them. And they can go ahead and they can actually use it. Right? Then when it's all said and done, you take those components and everything you have, all right, you package it all together and you send it to the person who's actually writing the app. And they use that to create the app. All right? Generally speaking, it's usually a designer working with a programmer. Very rarely do you have someone that's both. Those are two very different skills. All right? You'll always find an app that was done by a designer because it doesn't function well, and you'll always find an app done by a coder because it doesn't look well. Okay? And you know that. You can see it. Because as easy as they've made web design with drop and click and everything else, Squarespace, Wix, all these different things, and they have made it easy, if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know how to make it look good, it's not going to look good. Okay? So we're going to get into the first part of this. So right under our UX, we're going to go into what is UX and UI. All right? And this first video is just going to do a little explaining. It would help if the video actually had sound.
What the heck is UX design? And what does a UX designer actually do? These are difficult questions to answer because if you ask 5 different people, you're going to get 5 different answers. In this talk, I'm not only going to explain what UX design is, but also why I believe you should find out more about it, regardless of your job. UX, obviously, stands for user experience. And when we say user experience, we're referring to the what, when, where, why, and how someone uses the product, as well as who that person is. So, what, when, where, why, how, and who, these cover the user experience of a product, which is pretty much everything that affects the user's interaction with that product. So as you can imagine, a UX designer, which is someone who designs these interactions, is constantly asking a ton of questions. If you're someone who naturally questions things, UX design could be a great career for you, because it's the answers to these questions that shape a product's design. Of course, it's not all about the user's needs. UX designers need to take into account the business's needs as well. It's no use having a product that people love if it doesn't help the business achieve its goals. That's not a product, that's a side project. The UX designer aims for that sweet spot where user needs and business needs overlap. So how do they do this other than by asking a lot of questions? Well, a UX designer follows what's called a user-centered design process. We use a set of tools and techniques to take the user's needs into account at every stage of the product's lifecycle. I'm going to repeat that because it's a bit of a mouthful when you hear it for the first time. A user-centered design process takes the user's needs into account at every stage of the product lifecycle. I say product because these techniques apply to web apps, mobile apps, desktop apps, or even physical products. Okay, so that's all well and good, but why should you care? I'm going to give you 4 reasons why I believe this stuff matters so much. And this list doesn't include the obvious one, which is the fact that paying attention to UX results in you building a product that's awesome instead of one that people hate using. Hopefully that's a given. The reasons why I think you should learn more about UX are, number 1, you're probably doing some of this already. One thing I've learned is that when you understand how it is that you do what you do, you become infinitely better at it. Like the fable about the centipede who, when asked how it was that he walked, couldn't give an answer, but when he picked himself up and examined and flexed each of his 100 legs, he danced the most beautiful dance in the world. Here's number 2. User-centered design is a process, which means it's practically scientific. It's like taking the scientific method, using analysis and measurement, and applying it to humans and their behaviour. And that's fascinating to me, this notion that designers are artistic geniuses with a penchant for cutting off their own ear. It's nonsense. This is a science, well, a quasi-science. Which leads me to the 3rd reason that UX matters. It's not that hard, especially for people who are already technically inclined. I don't want to go putting myself out of a job here, but you know what? This stuff is not rocket surgery, to borrow from Steve Krug. Anyone can learn the basics of user testing and card sorting and writing scenarios and creating wireframes. It's actually very straightforward, which is a good segue to the fourth reason you should care about UX. And that's that it's fun. This stuff is fascinating. A career as a UX designer is interesting, it's challenging, it's rewarding, it pays well, and there's a very low barrier to entry. A lot of people feel uncomfortable calling themselves a designer because they're no good at choosing a typeface or a colour palette. Get over it. UX design is the design behind the visuals. Visual design is just one small part of it. It's an important part, but some of the best UX designers I know actually aren't that great at visual design, but they're really good at those other areas that are so important. And that's pretty much it. So while you might hear terms like information architect, user interface designer, interaction designer, or usability specialist, these can all be considered UX professionals. Now they might specialise in marketing or technology, or maybe they come from a user research, social media, or even customer support background. Either way, they're all asking a ton of questions and following a quasi-scientific process to do the design behind the visuals. And they're having a blast doing it. So that's what I'd like to leave you with. That if this stuff interests you, you may very well be well placed to have a promising career as a UX designer. Thanks for listening. My name's Matt, and I've just launched a site called UX Mastery.
So, you heard him say most UX people aren't actual visual designers. Okay, so that's where the UX lies. The user's experience with the application, with the desktop application, with the mobile application. When they're using it, how does it function for them? Right? What does it accomplish for them? And the most interesting part about this is something we forget as designers, which this experience and this process is you're thinking about the user every step of the way. All right, is this going to work for them if they push this? What if they have bigger fingers? What if they have smaller fingers? What if they can't do this? What if they can't do that? Okay, thinking about the user all the way through. So that's that's what UX is. All right, it's deciding on how the user is going to interface with the piece and how it's going to function. Questions on that? No questions on that? Nothing? You guys already have it figured out? So the user interface, okay? We talked about user experience. Interface is how the application functions. Experience, okay? So back up to our beginning piece here. All right. So thinking about that, all right, some of the other components that we're not going to get into is something called a persona. And a persona is what you would do as a UI UX designer. You actually research people. You ask them questions, and then you come up with a fake person that encompasses the answers that you found. All right. Not a part we're going to deal with right now, but that's how you get what a user wants from an application. 75 people said they wanted to do this. They wanted to do that. They wanted to look like this. Okay. The issue they have with most applications is this. All right. If they have a restaurant finder app and it doesn't find restaurants, that's a problem. Okay. It doesn't update. Things like that. All right. So we're not going to get too much into personas. So wireframing. This is what we're going to get into, okay? This is your next step.
Hi, I'm Ben Rowe, and in this video, I'll be talking about wireframes, what they are, the different types of wireframes that you can create, and some practical advice about how to improve your wireframes. But first things first, what is a wireframe? Well, a wireframe is like an architect's drawing. It's a draft visual representation of your user interface, and you can use wireframes to communicate 4 things. The structure of your navigation and information architecture, the layout, including page hierarchy and the placement of elements on the screen, the content. Wireframes give content writers an idea of how their content will be placed within the design, and the functionality. Wireframes can describe how your product will work and how it interacts with the people using it. Wireframes are an indispensable tool in any UX designer's toolkit, and they come in handy in many situations. They can be created at varying levels of fidelity, and this is what makes them so powerful. At the low fidelity end, you have the hand-drawn sketch. Sketches are a great way to flesh out ideas on your own or with your team. They're fast to create and quick to iterate on. And it doesn't matter if you're not great at sketching. Anyone who can draw a square, a circle, and a triangle is perfectly capable of creating a sketch. Next, we have the more traditional wireframe. Now, there are literally hundreds of tools that we can use to create these, but Balsamiq, OmniGraffle, Illustrator, and UX Pin are just some of these. Wireframes like this allow you to communicate your idea to your team, your clients, and your stakeholders. They can be very useful to explain your product and exactly what you're building. At the high fidelity end of the spectrum, a clickable prototype lets you design interactions and user flow. Clickable prototypes are the way to go when conducting usability testing. You could use Exua, Keynote, or even create wireframes directly into the browser using HTML with the help of frameworks such as Bootstrap or Foundation. Sometimes a quick sketch is all you need. Other times, an annotated wireframe is more appropriate. It really depends on the project and the stage you're at. Your wireframe should convey just the right amount of detail and no more. So here are a few practical tips to keep in mind when you're wireframing. 1. Keep them simple. The key to wireframing is speed and simplicity. Well, ultimately,
Speed and simplicity. You are not deciding what the app's going to look like right now. We're not even thinking about that yet. The hardest part about web design, app design, anything like this is you try to worry about two things at once. The most important part of this is functionality. How is it going to function? All right. Once you've decided that, then you take care of how's it going to look. Then you come back and bring them together. If you're trying to do both at the same time, it doesn't function. This wireframing that you're going to do right now is going to be boxes and circles and lines. What happens if I click here? Where does it take me? If I click here, where does it take me? How do I get back there? What button? Okay? And I'll show you a different version of this in a second.
wireframes out, so in most cases they don't need to be highly polished or pixel perfect. 2. Use a grid. Grids create structure and simplicity to your layouts. Every decent website these days is built on a grid, so make sure you're using one in your wireframes too. 3. Use short, sharp annotations. Unlike a 50-page functional spec doc, team members actually read wireframes more than any other document, so make sure you keep adding some annotations to your wireframes. Don't go overboard though, keep them brief and to the point. And 4. Encourage feedback. Sharing your wireframes and encouraging feedback from your team members is a surefire way to improve them. So stick your wireframes up on the nearest wall and encourage your team and anyone else to give you feedback. As you can see, wireframes can be easy to create, but it does take some experience to understand when and how to get the most out of them. As with most things, practice makes perfect.
So, first goal being your wireframe. Okay, I'm going to show you a paper prototype, which we're not going to do. It's virtually the same thing you're going to do right now, except we're not going to create the sliding scale. I tried this once, didn't go over well. It was just hard to function, okay? But this will give you an idea what I want out of your wireframes. It's a very exciting video. Get the idea? So on your piece of paper, on that first piece of paper, you're going to start out with the one on the left hand side roughly your login screen, your load screen, whatever your app's going to be. What I want you to do is at the top of the page, put your name and put the app that it's going to be, once you decide that, and don't go yet, okay? So that's what I'm looking for here, okay, in this first section, all right, if we go back to our main page again, all right, is to create the template, okay, the first particular part. What we'll do is we've got a little bit of time till art class, so we're going to start the process now. When we get back, as we guys get into a little bit, I expect this will take half an hour, 45 minutes tops, okay? Because you're not drawing anything. You're creating boxes, circles, like, oh, there'll be a photo here, there'll be some text here, there'll be a login area here, maybe it says login. You can make notes, you know, pop up. When you see things like keyboards, you're actually going to have assets, which means you have access to, like, an Apple keyboard. So XD is a little different. It's not, you know, what'll happen is you've got a screen that says login. What you would have to do is duplicate that screen and then just show that same page with the keyboard. So when the person clicks on the prototype, where the area that would pop up, it actually draws you to a page that looks like the keyboard popped up, because you can change the transitions. We'll get into it, okay? We're not going to do anything crazy. We're not going to be doing any animation or anything like that. These are basic changes to the app, all right? But the main objective here is that when you click on something, and the way it's going to work in your wireframe, all right, and let me just show you, I can do this easier here, all right, if I can, that whole separate piece. So let me pull this in. So what you're going to do is, on your paper, all right, is maybe you've got a box here, okay, and then maybe down here you've got a box here, and then maybe you've got, you know, login here. All right. What you're going to do is basically you're going to put the login and you're going to just go like that. Okay? You're going to draw a line to where things function. So there'll be lines all over this thing. All right? If you've got a menu up here, all right, maybe that's how you get back to the main page. Okay? So throughout your wireframe, there's going to be arrows going everywhere. But I should be able to sit with your wireframe, pretend that I'm using the app, and see where it takes me. The objective here is you don't want to end up to nowhere. Okay? You may have things on your main screen that you're not necessarily designing for. What I mean by that is I'm only asking you for 4 separate screens. The login being one. So 3 really 3 separate screens. So you might have a settings button up here, but it doesn't go anywhere. That's okay. That makes sense? If you have time, you could always add it in. But you might have elements on your page that don't take you places. Design it as though you have the 55 screens that you might need, but you're only going to need 3 for this particular assignment. Okay? So you'll have lines going everywhere. And I mean everywhere. This one goes here, this one goes here, this one goes here. And it's to help you sit there and click and go, okay, if I click this, this takes me here. Well, how do I get back? I don't have a way to get back. Crap. Let me go back. Okay? And it's the easiest, no-nonsense way to kind of figure out and think through the functionality of the application. All right? Later on today, we're going to get into a style tile, which is basically a mood board for your colors, your fonts, your images, things like that. How those are all going to work together. All right? So we're breaking this down into small pieces. All right? The beginning parts you kind of know. You have done thumbnails. This is your thumbnail, basically. All right? With a framework to it. Then we're going to get into our comps. We're going to get into our style tile, which is just picking out colors, picking out fonts, figuring out what it's going to look like. All right? The end, we get into XD. That's when it gets a little different. But we're going to spend a half an hour learning how to function in XD, and then XD is really simple to use. All right? So the first part is the wireframe. No, the first part is to decide what app you want to do, okay? But then it's the wireframe. Questions on the wireframes and how it kind of works. You've got one sheet in front of you for your wireframe, then that other one is for your comp later on. Again, I am only requiring 4 separate screens. okay? The login screen or the splash screen, whatever you want to call it, that might be for some of your apps that they don't have logins. It might just be the screen that has the logo on it. All right? And then it's 3 separate screens. I don't care if the screens are in essential order. In other words, I don't care if one's like profile, another one's like, restaurant. It doesn't matter to me. They don't have to necessarily make sense. It's just 3 separate screens you feel like redesigning, all right, and making look good. And we'll get to how it does that later on. Okay? All right, get to it.